Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar with Zerto. The title of the webinar is Pandemic Resilience, Reducing Downtime and Data Loss. A few housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout the presentations, please add the chat button for the questions and we'll make sure to give you an answer as soon as possible. Also, this presentation and the recording itself will be available on demand after the completion of this webinar. So thank you so much for your time and the opportunity to be here with you today. Just as a quick introduction, my name is Andy Fernandez and I'm a product marketing manager here at Zerto. Let's go over the agenda for today just so we have a clear understanding of some of the points that we're going to cover. First off, we're going to start looking at how Gartner approaches the phases of COVID-19 recovery for businesses, and then we're also going to take a look at what that means for infrastructure and operations organizations. After that, we're going to look at modern challenges and imperatives, and then look at the actual solutions and platforms that you require for disaster recovery, data protection, cyber resilience, cloud mobility, and throughout all of that, we're going to look at how the Zerto IT Resilience platform gives you those capabilities and ultimately delivers an economic impact for your organization. So let's get started. Gartner has defined the three phases of the COVID-19 reset, first approaching phase one of a response, then a recovery, and then a renewal. This isn't specific to IT, but it is specific to businesses as a whole. And if you look at this, a lot of organizations are going to be different. They have different sizes, budgets, different industries that they participate in. So you're going to see some organizations respond faster than others. Some are going to recover a bit quicker than others, and others are going to start renewing much faster than others, just because of the business that they have, and some may already be digital-first organizations as well. But let's take a look at how this is going to affect infrastructure and operations organizations. Now, if you look at the phases here, when we look at the response phase, from an IT perspective, most organizations have had to manage the immediate surge of remote work and demands. This also includes having to cut costs and reduce unplanned downtime. This was one of the most stressful periods for organizations who had to completely onboard an entire brand new remote work organization. This took a lot of time away from critical IT projects as well. So this response phase is really about keeping the lights on and making sure that you have to cut costs with the staff you have as well. And then you move forward to the second phase. Now the second phase has happened at different different stages for organizations, but it's about meeting new digital demands, having to adapt, having to be agile and overcome challenges with not being able to do things physically as well. And that also includes having to mitigate risk and having to mitigate those threats specifically around cybersecurity just because of how opportunistic cyber criminals are. And the third, it's about making sure that you have the infrastructure available to support new digital business models and deliveries. This really means accelerating your cloud adoption and scaling, whether it's via private cloud or the public cloud as well. Now let's look at some validation from the marketplace and some studies that have been conducted around this. Now when it comes to phase one of the response, if we look at the study that McKinsey & Company conducted, we saw that the share of employees working remotely full-time had increased, not only within IT organizations, but professional and business services, financial activities, manufacturing, and education and health services. Virtually every industry had to adapt and adopt a remote workforce. Now this was critical and really placed a strain from a resource perspective on everyone in the organization, but specifically IT. Now let's move on to some validation on phase two. Now with phase two, we saw that even during recovery from COVID, most people still have sticky behavior when it comes to expecting digital models and digital delivery. Now, if we look at the same study from McKinsey & Company, they looked at the average daily China offline consumption. And what that they found is even after the recovery, no one went to previous expectations when it came to physical services as well. Customers, partners, and employees all still preferred to drive through digital services as well. But that's not it. It's also around managing risk. And Honda was just one example of somebody who was susceptible to a ransomware attack and actually had their global operations halted. So Organizations are going through a tough time because you're having to support all of these new business models. You have more data and employee strains than ever before, but you still have to mitigate the usual suspects, especially those being so opportunistic. Now, what does phase 3 look like? Well, phase 3 is about renewal. It's post-recovery, but it's about how do you prepare for a new world, a new era, and how that affects your IT organizations. And if you look at the same study from McKinsey, you see that US consumers are accelerating adoption of digital channels, and a trend that's seen across global regions. And that digital adoption is here to stay. We may never reach the previous numbers that we had when it came to having to actually go to brick and mortar stores as well. So there's a lot that's still being determined now, but what we do know is the fact that digital only is here to stay for a while. Now, what does that actually mean for your business? What does it mean for your capabilities and what's required from your IT staff, from the solutions that you have, and your operations as well? Let's take a look. When we look at what are the imperatives for success for each phase of the recovery, right? Your renewal, your recovery, and being able to respond as well. And it comes down to 3 very important things. The first one is being able to reduce downtime and data loss. This means what does your DR and data protection solutions look like, and what is your approach? Second is being able to successfully recover from a cyber attack and having an organization that's able to mitigate this risk, an organization that is cyber resilient. And third, IT organizations need to be able to reallocate resources for new initiatives, new business models, new digital deliveries. And that requires cloud mobility, being able to scale your infrastructure and even move DevOps to the cloud as well. So let's start first with disaster recovery and data protection. Now that we're looking at reducing downtime and data loss, it's more critical than ever to understand the role of your DR, your backup, and your data protection solutions as well, right? And if we think about it today, most organizations have multiple siloed solutions, some legacy, some that are newer, but it still leads to a lot of staff, a lot of resources, and a lot of attention dedicated to a lot of these reactive products. But let's look at what is the difference between planned and unplanned downtime and how this affects all of the recovery scenarios that an organization has. And that's why we like to really classify the difference between unplanned and planned downtime, because one thing is a disruption and the other one is something that is actually good for the business in the long run. Now, when we think about unplanned, right, you have your true disaster scenarios, whether it's an actual natural disaster or your infrastructure has failed or you have outages or even something like a severe ransomware attack. But then you have a lot of your day-to-day disruptions that don't necessarily disrupt your entire business, but can cause barriers as well. That includes user errors, accidental deletions, and even file corruptions as well. But then you also have to make sure that you can archive and retain a lot of your critical data, whether that's for legal requirements, for compliance as well. But then you have what we call the planned downtime, meaning when you're doing something proactive for the business that will eventually drive to revenue or support new business models. And that includes supporting hybrid and multi-cloud strategies around application mobility, cloud protection, even cloud to cloud as well. And then you even get to operational services, things that are really directly proactive to the business, such as migrations, data center consolidations, being able to accelerate DevOps, patch testing, and management as well. And you also have some of the imperatives to modernize your infrastructure as well. Now, organizations can't simply just respond to the planned downtime. They need to be able to respond quickly to the unplanned downtime as well. And ultimately, a business needs to manage all of these disruptions and all of these recovery scenarios with SLAs that are up to date. What are your RTOs and RPOs today? Do they actually meet the business requirements and the expectations of your consumers? So as we've continued talking about what your current environments look like, right? Having siloed DR, data protection, right? This is what we're seeing. We're seeing that the legacy architecture of most organizations is that they use replication for DR purposes, right? To cover for infrastructure failures, for disasters, and this really only applies to mission critical applications. And then you have a completely siloed solutions for your backup requirements, right? This includes what you would conceive as a user error, a corruption, and also compliance as well. And these are not your most critical applications, but they're still very important. But you're not using replication for this, you're using periodic snapshots, and those come with very specific challenges. But we've looked at a different approach, a more modern approach that meets today's availability standards. Let's take a look. Now, with Zerto, we focus, and in our past, our bread and butter was disaster recovery. We were giving you RPOs of seconds using continuous data protection, meaning replication at the hypervisor level and a journal that allowed you to recover at any point in time. And most organizations were using this for mission critical applications. And being able to instantly recover from disasters, failures, or even ransomware attacks as well. But we looked at backup differently because backup is a very broad stroke. And what we saw is that there's really two specific functions within backup, or what we like to call data protection. And that is operational recovery and long-term retention. Now, long-term retention really refers to simply archiving and retaining data for the long term. That's for more compliance and legal reasons. But then you have your operational recovery as well, which is really of your day-to-day scenarios where you actually have to be able to recover to restore from file corruptions, from accidental deletions, things that are done more at a file level, at a VM level, not at an entire site level. And organizations were using Zerto and having continuous data protection and having the best RPOs and orchestration and automation for DR, but still using periodic snapshots and legacy backup for both operational recovery and long-term retention use cases. Now, what we did was something completely different. As we've continued our development since Zerto 7, where we converged DR and backup, at Zerto, we've extended data protection, our continuous data protection, across all application tiers, meaning that you can use the same platform, the same solution for your most critical applications, but also the rest of your applications and data in your environment. So this spans from disaster recovery to operational recovery and long-term retention, solving for backup use cases and implementing a strong data protection solution using the same technology. Now, why is this so valuable? Well, because we address the challenges of legacy backup and exceed that with continuous data protection. If you think about legacy backup, right? You have your production infrastructure and you have your backup infrastructure that requires backup servers, and you're usually dealing with some type of hardware appliance that comes with a lot of hidden costs, maintenance, and gives you a lot of challenges in both resource perspective, but also from technology as well. And then you have to deal with some long-term storage, whether that's a cloud archive or even dealing with backup tape and disk. And that's usually done off-site because you want to be able to fulfill your 3-2-1 rule. There's a lot of challenges that comes with both this infrastructure, this approach, and the technology that is used to do so. The first thing is backup technology utilizes snapshots. So that leads to a massive production impact. And because of that production impact, most organizations have to deal with making periodic or nightly backups. So that's giving you windows of 24 hours where you might be unprotected and you have data loss as well, and even downtime. And this requires, as we've talked about already, a lot of hardware that has hidden costs, maintenance, and very complex licensing methodologies. This also requires you to move to production and recover from secondary storage as well. So you're not really getting the RPOs and the RTOs that you would get from using a DR solution that utilizes replication. Now, why is continuous data protection different? Well, with continuous data protection, first of all, it's software only, right? So you don't have to deal with hardware. You don't have to deal with the tragic updates and maintenance that hardware requires and the scale issues as well. And you can do so without a production impact. And we're going to get into how we do that and how our replication works with Zerto. But ultimately, by using this architecture with continuous data protection, you have one solution for DR and for your what you would consider backup use cases and what we would call data protection, which means long-term retention and operational recovery. So let's get into the actual platform and how we can help you throughout each of these phases of post-COVID-19 recovery. Now, at a high level, what do we do as an organization? At Zerto, we converge cloud mobility, disaster recovery, and backup or data protection solutions into a single, simple, scalable IT resilience platform. And let's take a quick look under the hood as to how that works. Let's take a look under the hood first of all, looking at our replication and what makes it so special. First of all, it's easy to deploy and it's software only. And if you look at what really makes this work and what you deal with our replication, it's a Zerto virtual manager, which is easy to deploy, and you have a one-on-one relationship with the hypervisor management component. And it's just a simple small Windows application as well. And then you have what we call the VRA, which is a scale-out architecture leaving a very small footprint. It has built-in compression and bandwidth throttling. It also contains the components for backup and restore. But most importantly, what our replication does, it's continuous block level replication. This means that there's no performance impact, no snapshots, and no agents. And what that leads to is RPOs of seconds. All of these blocks are replicated to a journal in the target site. And this is what gives us those RPOs of seconds because it is at the hypervisor level as well. And it's simple and easy to use. It doesn't require snapshots. This isn't storage replication either. This is exclusively focused on near synchronous replication at the hypervisor level. Now, let's look at the mechanism that organizations and our customers use to actually recover these checkpoints. And that is journal-based recovery. And we discussed how backup windows were a pain because due to the production impact of snapshots, you would have 10, 12, 16-hour windows where you simply had to accept data loss, for example, during a ransomware attack. Now let's actually simulate how that would work with Zerto. Because of our block level replication and because those checkpoints are being observed every 5 seconds, you can roll back in time every 5 seconds to the checkpoint of your satisfaction. So if you apply that to a ransomware attack, what that does is, let's say that in a scenario where you're hit at 1701.51, you could simply roll back and recover an entire site, an entire application, single VMs, and even perform file level recoveries as well. This makes it extremely easy to use as well. Almost anybody within the IT organization can learn how to be able to perform this with the journal because it's that simple. Now, we've talked about RPOs with our replication and how we can do it in seconds, but another very important piece is RTOs themselves. And to really understand how Zerto excels there, we need to look at how legacy solutions approach application recovery. Now, if you think about traditional protection, how we approach your enterprise applications, the very nature of enterprise applications means it has multiple VMs that make up that entire application stack. Now, because most organizations are conducting nightly backups, what you're seeing is an incremental snapshot being performed. Now, the problem with that is because they're different VMs, they're being snapshotted at different point in times. Now, when you're simply archiving, this doesn't matter. But when you have to recover this application, you now have to do the math and find the common denominator checkpoint, or more likely a copy point that you can point to and simply recover. And that's a problem because that's just doing it for one application. Now imagine having to scale that across multiple applications. This takes hours, days, and for some large enterprises, weeks to perform. And that's a problem. Now with Zerto, what we focus and pride ourselves in being able to allow you to easily and consistently recover these enterprise applications, where we treat them like cohesive units where you can protect, move, and recover an entire application stack as one unified entity. You can quickly recover entire applications to the same point in time. But let's actually illustrate what that looks like. Now, with application consistency grouping, or what we like to call a virtual protection group in our architecture, all you have to do is set up the specific VMs that pertain to that application, and you can simply replicate them at a consistent checkpoint, meaning at every checkpoint of 5 seconds, you have your entire application stack. Now, what this does is when you actually have to recover in a scenario, for example, that you're encrypted from ransomware, you can consistently select the checkpoint and recover that application consistently. That's extremely crucial when it comes to large enterprises having to recover post-event as well. Now, we've looked at specifically DR and data protection as a solution and the challenges behind that and how Zerto can help, but let's look at a very specific use case that we've already talked about, and that's cyber resilience. Now, if we think about the industry's approach over the last few years, we've seen an evolutionary shift in an approach from cybersecurity exclusively to looking at cyber resilience and being able to mitigate the risk and recover from cyber attacks. And what I mean by that is that many organizations have consistently focused on preventative measures, but they realize that because applications data is all over the place in different formats and different workloads, and even in the hands of different employees, it's become a risk, and there's more attack vectors than anywhere. So the focus has shifted not only on also having the right hardware and prevention and education within the organization, but being able to recover from cyber attacks effectively. Now, the reason that we're seeing this shift is because ransomware attacks are more prevalent than ever. And last year, we sponsored a survey with this IDC called the State of IT Resilience. And in that, with a sample size of over 500 IT pros, we found that 84% of them experienced a malicious attack in the past 12 months, 89% of which were successfully attacked. And out of those who were successfully attacked, 93% of that resulted in data corruption or loss. Now, let's visualize this with an actual customer story. Before Zerto, Tenkata Protective Fabrics was an organization that used backup tape and disk. They had, during their first ransomware attack, their entire file server affected. And that, because of their daily backups, caused a 12-hour data loss. And because of their approach to application consistency and its recovery, it took them 2 weeks to recover. 2 weeks away from proactive activities, 2 weeks away from being able to implement new deliveries for digital services. But it was focused on something reactive like recovering from ransomware. Now, Tenkata was able to utilize Zerto's replication in its journal to simply recover to a point in time, meaning they found that they were encrypted at a specific point in time and simply rolled back to the previous checkpoint. And once again, to reiterate how important the journal is for Zerto is the fact that via this easy mechanism within our UI, you can simply recover a site, an application, a VM, and a file to any point in time that you desire. Now, what this did for Tenkata is they suffered through a second ransomware attack after they became a Zerto customer. But things changed. They went from a backup tape and disk DR and data protection strategy to continuous data protection with Zerto. And in this attack, they only suffered 10 seconds of data loss, and it took them under than 10 seconds to be able to recover. Now that really showcases the value and the improved RPOs and RTOs that Zerto delivers on a consistent basis. And in a time that's more than ever crucial to reduce downtime, to reduce the amount of time spent on reactive activities, it's clear that organizations need to move on from traditional backup. Another really important imperative for organizations is being able to have cloud mobility. Have the ability to reallocate their resources and scale with the cloud. But the first thing that you need to be able to do so is reliable infrastructure. And the public cloud, and there's also private cloud providers as well and managed service providers, but the public cloud alone provides so many resources, specifically availability zone, high availability zone, and regions as well, that allow you to make sure that no matter what happens, no matter where it happens, that your organization is protected, that your organization has almost unlimited capabilities, and you're also moving away from a CAPEX model to OPEX. And that's a really important piece in an era where cutting costs and making sure that organizations are lean are more important than ever. Because if you think about it, just think about DR. Let's not get into DevOps. Let's not get into data protection. Just with DR, there are a lot of cost areas specific to having a secondary on-premises site. If you think about it, you have to deal with hardware, appliance and maintenance costs. You have to deal with everything that comes with the remote site from a cost perspective. This means the facility, software licenses, bandwidth, electricity, cooling, everything that's required to maintain another redundant site. Now, this is a problem, but what people can do with the cloud is simply focus to a pay-as-you-go model, a consumption model that allows you to avoid large capital costs and simply pay for what your organization needs. But DR is just the beginning. After you replace your secondary site with DR and take that baby step into a hybrid cloud strategy, that opens the door for much more. Not just for data protection or to solve for backup, but to continually improve your environment and to continually accelerate your enterprise application development with the tools that are simple plug and play with organizations like Microsoft Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, and many others as well. Now, how does Zerto support this? With Zerto, let's take a look at the Microsoft architecture because this is very important, and then we'll look at the rest of the public cloud vendors as well. Well, with Zerto, it's still the same replication that goes to the public cloud. You still have within your primary data center your ZVM and your VRA, and what you simply do is you replicate to the cloud and install what we call a Zerto Cloud Appliance. Now, all that does is uses Azure blob storage. The replica disks are stored in page blobs. The journal data is stored in block blobs, and it requires a VPN or express route for connectivity. But that's it. It's as simple as using a secondary site to replicate. There are no barriers with Zerto and you being able to transfer or to migrate your workloads and DR operations to the cloud. But it doesn't stop with Azure. Zerto has strong strategic alliances within the public cloud space and service providers as well. You can continue using an on-premise strategy, right, with VMware vSphere or Microsoft Hyper-V, but you can also utilize the public cloud to scale your infrastructure and reduce costs. That you can do that with AWS and with Azure, and you can even approach it from a VMware as a service model. This includes organizations like IBM Cloud and even Azure VMware Solutions, and more recently, the Google Cloud Platform as well. And there's also a network that supports Zerto of over 350 managed service providers as well. Now, what this does, especially for large-scale organizations and global enterprises, is the fact that Zerto allows you to simply choose the infrastructure that works for your organization and have the freedom to move that data to, from, and back, giving you full cloud mobility and full workload mobility as well. Now, this all sounds a bit complex when you think about all the capabilities and opportunities that you have with Zerto. But its biggest differentiation, in my opinion, is its orchestration and automation. The fact that you have one interface, one UI, one experience to deal with a simple management across on-premises and cloud. You can simply look at your entire site topology, and understand its performance across the board. And you can also have seamless orchestration and automation within 3 clicks, with no production impact on testing and automated compliance reporting. All packaged with full visibility and control with analytics that you can access from any browser or mobile device as well with iOS. Now, we've looked at a lot of capabilities from a technology perspective. But another thing to consider is, what is the actual total economic impact of a platform like Zerto? What does it do for my business? What does it do for my costs, my labor, and the resources required? Let's look at an obvious one first, with the cost of unplanned outages. Now, in this report, Forrester, the analyst group, conducted extensive interviews with a lot of organizations with different industries. And what they found as before Zerto, organizations at the lowest were experiencing 4 outages per month and a high of thousands of outages a month. These are, to be clear, unplanned outages. And this all really depended on the size of the company and the specific nature of the business operations. But the average impact of downtime was around $10,000 per hour. After using Zerto, the organization reduced rate of unplanned outages to 1 for every 10 VMs per year, or 8 unplanned outages per month in year 1. This was a risk adjustment reduction of 15%. So it's clear that organizations had a reduced cost of over $2.5 million over 3 years. Now, this is tackling the first barrier, which is unplanned outages. But what about the planned downtime that we had spoken about previously? And just to refresh a bit, planned downtime is often the result of upgrades, patches, or new releases of tech solutions, modernizations, and even migrations. And organizations, it's critical for them to have a lot of these initiatives to remain competitive. Now, with Zerto, organizations were able to reduce both the frequency and the duration of planned downtime. What this meant is that with Zerto, you had a reduced annual cost of over $960,000 and a risk adjustment of 15%. So these organizations would have otherwise required 8 hours of downtime each month. Now, this is something that's extremely important. Not only is Zerto reducing the cost, the frequency, and the duration of unplanned downtime, but also planned downtime. But as we've spoken already, Zerto does more than that. We talked about it being a true platform for DR, for operational recovery and long-term retention, which translates to backup or data protection. Now, what does Zerto do for that? When you look at the avoiding costs of software tools replaced by Zerto, each of these companies have indicated that the functionality of Zerto displaced previous software tools, so they were able to simply replace them because Zerto had the functionality that they needed. Now, in avoided costs, that led to over $776,000 over 3 years. That shows you the power that Zerto has to simply allow you to get rid of those legacy backup tools, those legacy migration tools, and DR tools as well. Now, after looking at downtime and after looking at the cost of being able to replace tools, another one was the reduced cost of disaster recovery operations. This means how much time, how many resources are you dedicating to this? Now, prior to using Zerto, organizations that were interviewed, the disaster recovery testing required the time of 8 employees for 3 days each quarter. That's 768 hours by the DR team each year. Now, with Zerto, because of its simplicity, because of its orchestration and automation, employees were able to focus on addressing needs and spend less time on these operations, not having to manage reactive technical operations. Now, if you want to quantify this, the organizations were able to save 2.4 FTEs in productivity each year. That's a savings of 2.4 full-time employees that led to $204,000 as well. Now, we knew that Zerto's bread and butter originally was disaster recovery, but as we've continued accelerating the development of our product and making it a true comprehensive IT resilience platform, our backup capabilities became obvious and organizations started using them. Now, before, the organizations consistently reported that they previously had backup administrations that spent hours each morning both confirming backups, checking for completed jobs, and having to address failed backups and other overnight anomalies. Now, using Zerto, the organization was able to save the productivity of 0.6 full-time employees and focus their time elsewhere. This is energy, time, and labor spent on managing something reactive like backup, and really focus on helping build the business, helping drive strategy across the board, especially when you think about in times of COVID-19, how important and crucial it is for the survival of these organizations. Now, we've looked at DR, we've looked at data protection or backup, but another very important piece is cloud mobility. If you think about something like planning a migration, it's not like data protection or disaster recovery where it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of time and continuous energy spent on it. Migrations are more of a few times a year at most, but it's still important to be able to save resources and time to dedicate doing so. Because of how easy Zerto is, because it's vendor agnostic, and it simply allows you to move data to where you need to within the public cloud or even private cloud as well, organizations interviewed also were able to save a ton of effort required to manage a one-time migration that they had, which was over $66,000 over 3 years as well. Now, this is important because usually organizations still require a third-party tool to manage these migrations. Zerto simply allows you to do that as well. Any VM that you can protect and recover, you can also move, and that is a critical capability. But let's actually put some customers and some actual logos and understand exactly how they benefited from the Zerto IT Resilience platform. Now, here's a summary of just a few major logos and organizations that saw quantifiable differences using Zerto instead of legacy backup, legacy data disaster recovery, and cloud migrations. And the first one is HCA Healthcare. They were able to reduce their DR solutions from 4 to 1, and they saved over $10 million over a period of time. BJ's was able to completely eliminate the physical secondary site and move to the public cloud. This led to over $800,000 in savings in 3 years. Starbucks was able to improve their operational efficiency, which led to a 16x decrease in time spent on production support processes. And United was able to protect their website and their application that generates over $1 million an hour. And they were able to protect it by avoiding the cost of unplanned and planned downtime that other organizations had. Zerto was able to shield them from that. And ultimately, XPO Logistics was also able to optimize infrastructure utilization. In 36 months, they were able to merge 21 data centers into 6. Can you imagine that? So Zerto gives you the ability to make sure that you're not only protecting your environments and protecting your critical applications, but all of those applications within all of your VMs as well. But it also allows you to reduce the cost, the time, the resources and labor, and the expenses related to those activities as well. So in conclusion, I want to take a look at what the platform is and how to summarize it. Now, if you ever think of the Zerto IT Resilience platform, think of it as one solution, one true platform with one SKU for disaster recovery, operational recovery, long-term retention, which translates of both of those to being to data protection, hybrid and multi-cloud, and operational services as well. And this is all powered with continuous data protection, the ease of orchestration and automation, and the visibility of its analytics that are all included. With strong strategic alliances with Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, AWS, IBM Cloud, VMware, Microsoft Hyper-V, and HPE as well. Just for reference, so that you can validate some of the statements that we're making, you have the ability to to download the full report online from Forrester that we sponsored. That way you can see the criteria, the selection criteria, and the math that was performed, and a lot of the conclusions and additional insights that they gained during this time as well. And another one that's very important, specifically because we cited a lot of the downtime costs and some of the ransomware statistics that we had, was the State of IT Resilience report. You can download this online, sponsored by us to IDC, and it was conducted in 2019. So I fully urge you to be able to look this up. Now, what we can do is move over to questions. And I'm really thankful for your time, and I'm going to take a look at some of the questions that haven't been answered yet, and we'll approach that. Thank you so much.